Yeah. So, hello.
All right.
Okay, that's better. All right, go ahead, Mike. What is yours?
Hi, good afternoon. This is Mike O'Grady, Legislative Counsel. I'm going to run through a quick side-by-side of S60 and H229. S60 is an act relating to establishing the Farm Security Special Fund to provide grants for farm losses due to weather conditions. And similarly, H229 is an act relating to establishing the Farm and Forestry Operations Security Special Fund to provide grants for losses to farms and forestry operations due to weather conditions. You will see in the side-by-side that where there are differences, the text is highlighted. In the finding section and throughout, you will see "and forestry operations" added. Where it is not present in S60, it is included in H229. There was discussion in the Senate committee about the second finding and how it referenced that many existing state and federal programs are not equitably distributed to small and medium scale farms. The committee downstairs did not like distinguishing between small, medium, and large farms, and any reference to that was removed. In addition, the committee downstairs did not like subdivisions 4 and 5 of the findings regarding the purpose of state funding should be ensuring viability of farms and forestry operations, and they did not like the language about continuously investing in farms. So those were removed. And then the other differences in the last finding provision, the whereas clause, effectively what the state should do, they are the same except for H229 addresses forestry operations where S60 does not. Moving into the establishment of the program, they are both created in Title VI, Chapter 207, creating a new subchapter in that chapter related to the promotion and marketing of Vermont farms. The definition of eligible weather condition is the same except for reference to forest operation. The fund and its board, the difference is the inclusion of forestry operations. And in H229, there is that definition of forestry operations, which is the definition from 10 VSA 2602, which is the default Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation's definition of forestry operation. You have the creation of the fund. Again, just the difference between farm and forestry operations. There's some slight technical tweaking to the language for how the money is moved. The money from the general fund to the Farm Security Special Fund is appropriated, not transferred. Or actually, it's the other way around. It should be transferred, not appropriated, because it's between two funds. Then for the grant process, there is the reference to forestry operations in H229, where it's not present in S60. And then there are some substantive changes. The Senate wanted to say impacted livestock and not just livestock. They wanted to allow the secretary to confirm losses with the site visit, which is not in H229. They wanted to allow for repair of roads necessary to access farms and not logging roads.
Sorry, just because I'm not sure I'll have a chance to go back. Impacted livestock then means rather than just, so it wouldn't just be destroyed livestock?
Right.
Without that.
Right. They wanted it potentially it's sick livestock or not just destroyed.
Representative Nelson.
Yeah, Chairman, I think that would reference like in the ice storm back decade or
98.
98. the 98 ice storm, there was a lot of impacted livestock due to power outages, prolonged power outages, so it would.
One of the things they discussed was drought. The animals aren't destroyed, but their production or their ability for slaughter would be affected. So that was another category.
Mhm.
So one of the significant changes in the application process, S60 requires submission of your Schedule F, and H229 just requires a year-end financial statement. And then in the processing of the applications, H229 gave the review board 1 week to review the administratively complete application, and then 2 weeks from recommendation by the board for the secretary to make the award. The Senate went to 15 days for both of those timeframes. So within 15 days following submission of an administratively complete application, the review board shall recommend to the secretary whether to issue a grant. And then within 15 days of that recommendation, the secretary issues the grant. In the review board, the first change is the addition of forestry operation. There is a change in the representation, the membership. So H229 had representatives of 3 organizations or entities with experience granting relief funds or technical assistance to farmers or forestry operations, where S60 has representatives of 3 ag organizations who can demonstrate expertise in dealing with all sizes and types of farms in Vermont, whether through granting funds, offering technical assistance, or advocacy, have a proven track record of working with farmers. Again, there was discussion about limiting it to small and medium, and they wanted it to apply to all sizes and types of farms. And then H229 has 2 forestry operators who have received relief funding appointed to the board. One of the questions I have was, where do you want the forestry operators to have received relief funding from any state source, or is it just Agency of Agriculture sources?
So the idea is that in order to be on this board, you would have experienced a loss in the past and
Required assistance, yes.
and in both cases, so both bills have that, but because the section 4, subsection 4 is also farmers who receive.
Right, but this is an Agency of Agriculture program.
Mhm.
And what type of relief have they been providing
Forest.
forestry operations? I doubt that they have been providing much, if it's anything other than maple.
Representative Nelson.
Okay, on section 5, I think it should say 2 forestry operators who have received relief funding. And then they could be appointed by the Secretary, not saying they received their relief funding from the Secretary of Agriculture or from AAFM.
I would, if you want to go that way and you don't want to limit it to the agency, I would say who have received relief funding from any state source.
Yes, yes.
So they could have gotten BGAP, they
Yeah,
could have gotten
exactly.
viability, they could have gotten some other form of assistance.
I like that better in both instances. The other question I had, does this create for those forestry people, loggers, or farmers, would this make it a conflict of interest to them if they were on the board and their farm got wiped out?
They would probably have to consult with the State Ethics Commission about whether or not that constituted a conflict of interest under the state ethics code. It probably would, and they would have to remove themselves from review of the application for assistance.
Okay.
But I can't say for sure, since the State
Yeah,
Ethics Commission is the one that would make that
That's
determination.
something we'd have to find out.
I just want to be sure that we got time to let Mike finish here. We will have time to go back and hash out what we want to do once we've seen what's in here, if you don't mind, Chad, yeah, thanks.
Sure. So in the member terms, the H-229 had a specific 2-year term for forestry operator members. That's obviously not an S60, so that language didn't need to be there. There was a requirement in S60 that the board annually report to the General Assembly the total documented Vermont farm financial losses from eligible weather conditions averaged over the previous 3 calendar years. That is not in H-229. And then the big last change is the really the funding. And S60, as it passed out of Senate Ag, had $7.5 million in general fund money going to this security fund. The Senate Appropriations Committee removed that 7.5 million and left it silent and stated that they will address it in the big bill. Whereas in H-229, there was a funding intent statement and then a report for future appropriations in fiscal year 2027 that was going to be based on the farm losses from eligible weather conditions averaged over the previous 3 calendar years. So that's probably the biggest substantive difference. If you're going to seek appropriations right away in FY26, are you going to wait to have a report back and then an appropriation next session? The committee downstairs wanted to just move the program along sooner rather than waiting.
Did the original S60 include an immediate appropriation, or?
No, it did not.
It looked more like.
It looked very similar to Section 3 of H-22.
Yeah.
But the Senate committee didn't want to wait.
Questions, Representative Lipsky?
Counselor, why did the Senate, did they ever have forestry in?
No,
It
never had forestry in. I think it was Senator Hardy's decision as the sponsor not to include it.
Representative Boston?
Early on in your introduction today, you mentioned there was a number 4 and number 5 that were taken out, and one of them was about not supporting the viability of farms or something. It just seems so strange to me that an agriculture, why would they explain to me the motivation for number 4, why you would not support that as an agriculture committee?
So I wasn't there when they made that decision. I was just told afterwards that they wanted them out because they didn't think that they were necessary.
I guess I would disagree. If we actually go back and look at it, it feels important to me, but yeah.
As you've pointed out in this committee before, the findings, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you've pointed out in this committee before that the findings section often can cause a little trouble, and that the bill ought to be able to stand on its own, in theory.
Yeah.
It just kind of sounds like an intention, really. It's almost like intent language. And for somebody that isn't on our committee to read that, it'd be like, oh, that's what it does. It feels like if there's possibility, it could be useful for other people to kind of get to get what we'd be wanting.
So without going too far afield into my feelings about finding section, they're supposed to be based on fact. And there's supposed to be documented evidence supporting.
Mhm.
When you run into issues with that standard is when you're moving from the factual assertion to the state should. And we generally leave those kind of like whereas clauses in a resolution. All right, you're just calling for the state to do something. These are both kind of more whereas clauses than factual assertions.
Mhm.
And they're not really requiring anything. The state should ensure that farms and forestry operations remain viable. Yes, but like what is is there any factual support of that? Is that more of a whereas clause? If it's a whereas clause, maybe you put that underneath 6A, which you already do. And so I think that that's one of the ways that legislative counsel differs from the advocate world. We try not to assertive in the finding sections to based on anything other than fact. Having been a consultant before, I call some of the finding language as consultant speak. You're like trying to put the biggest and best shine on something. So that's what I do.
Are there any other questions about what's in there? So you pointed out that the very end, there's a substantive difference. Obviously, having forestry operations throughout is a substantive difference. The removal of those findings,
Mhm. The Schedule F versus just a year-end financial statement.
including something a little more, yeah. Okay.
And then the timing. That's about it.
Okay, good. We are, thanks, Mike. I know if you need to go, I know you're expected in another committee. We're going to be taking testimony this week from farmers advocates on this bill, and I think the committee may in fact have questions about whether we need this fund, but beyond whether we need a fund, how the fund is set up, who's on the board, what the timing ought to be, whether we include forestry. It's not in at 60. So, and we do have also, I should say, testimony tomorrow from the Department of Forest Parks on, is that tomorrow?
Is my review.
Thank you.
It was just added to the agenda moments ago.
Okay. On this bill, so. Before we move on, and we have, as I said, we're going to switch subjects somewhat abruptly here, but before we move on, any immediate reactions or any thoughts that anybody wants to share? Again, I'll say we're coming back to this this afternoon, so. All right. Then we will switch gears. We've invited the agency, Steve Dwinell from the Ag Agency, to talk a little bit about some of the issues that are raised in H326. This is the rodenticide bill. And Steve, if you've had a chance to look at the bill, I imagine.
Yeah, for the record, Steve Dwinell, Agency of Agriculture Food Markets, requested to testify. The only thing I've seen for the bill is the short form, and it's limited language. It's such, that's all I've seen.
So that's all there is. So
That's all
you've seen what there is. Yep. And we had the bill introduced to the committee by the sponsor a week or two ago, and got a little more. So we took some testimony from him just on why he'd introduced the bill, what these different materials were, and then we had the Ledge Council just walk through the bill and got a little more background on first and second generation and so forth. But I think it would be helpful, and the committee then subsequently had a bit of a conversation last week and decided this is something we'd like to know more about anyway. So maybe you could talk about, certainly share anything you want, but also the agency's role just in dealing with sites in general.
Yeah, I'm glad to. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about this. So I forwarded a presentation on rodenticide stewardship, which soon has been.
We have that on our webpage. Yeah. Do you want to put that up, Steve, or?
Yeah, I'd like to go through that. What I'm going to talk about is, what our role is and what we're trying to do and what the role of the rodenticides are. So rodenticides are pesticides. They're regulated by our agency. They are used for, managing rodent populations. It's an area that has a lot of information associated with it, a lot of science behind it, a lot of regulation behind it, a lot of activity at the national level on this issue. And I'll go into a little bit of that, but just sort of some of the stuff you may have heard before. So if you have a question or whatever, just let me know. But talking about the rodenticides, there are basically three groups of rodenticides. There's what we call the first generation anticoagulants, and those are warfarin, difecinone, and chlorodifecinone. Those have been around for a long time, I think since the 50s. What they do is they prevent coagulation when there's an injury or blood loss, either external or internal. So essentially, what happens is the rodents have blood loss, and the issue with them when they were developed and deployed is that rodents started developing resistance to them. So and they required multiple feedings to be effective. So that led to some issues. So then a second generation of rodenticides were developed, and that's the second generation anticoagulants, and those are bromidifene, bromadiolone, difenicum, and difethialone. They are more toxic than the first generation. They are expected to result in mortality after single feeding. On the downside for those products is they tend to stay in the carcasses longer. They're retained longer than the first generation anticoagulants, which leads to exposure to animals that feed on them. Then there's the non-anticoagulant rodenticides, and there are three of those products: bromomethylene, cholecalciferol, and zinc phosphide. They all have different modes of action, and different issues associated with each one of them. Bromomethylene is probably the most commonly used material right now in Vermont. It is one of the issues with that is there's no antidote. For the anticoagulants, you can do vitamin D3 and things like that. Vitamin K, right? Sorry, vitamin K to stop. But with bromomethylene, if an animal gets the sufficient dose, there's really nothing that can be done. Cholecalciferol results in hypercalcemia. It results in basically a heart attack for the animal that feeds on it. There are a number of formulations for that. And then zinc phosphide is a chemical that when it's ingested, the stomach acids actually cause it to form phosphine gas, which is what kills the animal. And so it's fairly toxic material, it is a very toxic material, has to be handled very carefully. And some of those products are federally restricted.
Representative O'Brien?
So Steve, just to be clear, when you talk about antidote, you're talking about if a pet, say, ate.
Exactly. Right. If a dog, and it's not so much that, usually what happens is the dog finds the bait itself and consumes it, and the owner becomes aware of that and takes it to the vet, and there's something to be done. Yeah.
Also people.
But the anticoagulants have no antidote.
No, the anticoagulants have antidotes. It's bromomethylene that doesn't. If there's a sufficient.
Got that. Okay, yeah, the non-anticoagulant.
Yeah. So just the number of products registered in the state right now. This is just our most recent. So we have about 47 of the first gen products, 69 of the second gen, 19 zinc phosphide products registered, 11 of the cholecalciferol products, and 80 of the bromomethylene products registered. So that's what's registered in the state now. And they have different registration categories. So the first and the the second generation products, as a result of legislation last year, are all restricted use. They're all, some are federally restricted use, but they're all state restricted use. So only persons who are certified applicators can purchase them. Okay.
So we won't find those at a farm store?
If you do, let us know. We've been pretty, active in visiting all the stores to make sure they're not on the shelves.
So where would I go to buy Tomcat? I'm a licensed applicator.
If you're a licensed applicant.
I am.
Yeah, well, so Tomcat's a brand name.
It is.
And they have-
It's a bromoethylene.
Well, they also have other products.
Okay.
Yeah, so different companies have different brand names, so they'll have different products registered
Mhm.
under that brand name. So you may be able, now bromomethylene is not a restricted use. So bromomethylene, cholecalciferol, some of the zinc phosphide products, and then the first generation products are all either what are called a Class B or a Class C product. Class C products are products you can buy,
Walmart.
yeah, consumers can buy. Class B are what are called restricted sale. Can only be sold by pesticide dealers who have taken an exam and passed it, and then can handle and so there'll be places like Tractor Supply and Agrimark and places like that that cater to more farm type situations. Those are Class B products. But the Class A can only be sold by Class A dealers, and those are the sort of the mainline ag dealers who are dealing with farmers and dealing with some of the other Class A products.
Okay, in Orkin?
So Orkin, good segue. So we have the second slide there, or the next slide is the number of pesticide companies that are certified to do pest control. We have 89 companies in the state that are certified to do this, licensed to do it. 272 individuals who are certified to do structural pest control. We have 9 government individuals too. We have BGS has a person who can do this. So those individuals, so the pesticide companies are certified. They have certified applicators, so they can purchase and use restricted use products. And they've been trained, and we inspect them. And did that answer your question, Representative?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so they do use the second generation products because they're more effective and have the
So the second generation anticoagulants are the only ones that are Class A
right now, yes.
right now.
Except there's a couple of zinc phosphide products that are.
All right, so bromomethylene is not a Class A.
Bromomethylene is not a Class A. It's not an anticoagulant. It's not a Class A product. Now, I don't have a slide about this, but I'll tell you what so EPA has been working on this issue for a long time. And in 2008, they did a safety review and concluded that to avoid exposure to humans and pets, that products that are sold to consumers that are available in general consumer retail outlets can't be sold as individual bait blocks. They have to be sold already packaged in a bait station that would prevent access.
Mhm.
If you go into Home Depot or one of those places and you go to buy, you'll find it already in a container, which is intended to keep animals or people from contacting it. There are some, I believe there may be some that are available as refills for those. And the whole issue we'll get to in a minute, but the whole issue with rodenticides is how you use it. Okay. Rodenticides are toxic. They're pesticides. You have to be careful how you use them. There can be unintended consequences if you don't use them carefully. And so our whole effort has been to educate people about using them properly. And admittedly, it's, we can do a lot more. I mean, we've done what we can, but there's opportunities to do more. But when you use a rodent bait, you need to put it in a bait station. And there are lots of bait stations on the market. They're sold as prepackaged in some cases. So the idea is to prevent, the opportunity for a pet or a child or anybody to contact the bait itself. It's in a bait station. And that's what we've been trying to do. Let me just talk about the label here real quick. So I just gave you an example of a particular label. This is a Class B product here, in particular, the Ditrac. It's difascinous first generation. But what I wanted to point out is that the label includes very explicit instructions that you have to put it in a bait station. You know, when you use this product, it needs to be, if there's any opportunity for a pet or a wildlife or a human to contact it, it needs to be in a bait station. Okay, and that's a label enforceable requirement. And one of the things that we have found, we've had investigated cases and taken action against folks who take the bait and they just scatter it. Okay, and that's where the exposure can happen to pets or to wildlife.
Form is the bait in.
Most of the bait is in a wax block, about an inch high, you know, maybe an inch by half an inch. Yeah, maybe a little bigger. My measurements aren't so great, but they're wax blocks with some kind of attractant in it, or sometimes they incorporate grain or seeds or something to attract the rodents. But the idea is that the rodent gnaws on it, ingests it, and then gets a lethal dose.
When you talk about scattering it,
Well, so you can buy, like the label there that I showed you, you can buy, that comes in a bucket with 8 pounds of bait blocks in it. Very clear on the label, you got to put it in a, but what happens is people buy it and they take it and they just throw it around the yard. And we've had cases like that. And that's where you have problems. Okay. So one of the things we've done is, skip ahead a little bit. And we testified about this last year. We've made an effort to go to all the stores that sell these products. And we created posters which get put up, which say, you know, you have to put them, it's a legal requirement that you use a bait station. You know, we've been educating the dealers that when you sell a bucket, sell bait stations with it. And they have bait stations there available. And you know, if you go into any of the stores now, to any of the Tractor Supplies or any of those places, you'll see the poster up there. Home Depot has, and they all have it up there. So that's what we're trying to do, is educate people. We also created we have a YouTube video, you know, we put it on our website, and but you know, there's more that could be done, you know, with enough resources and effort. But what we want to do is make sure people are using these products properly to minimize any exposure or any exposure.
Senator O'Brien.
What's the difference in toxicity between, say, a piece of bait that's not in a bait station, or a rat that's eaten that, so my dog, say, is exposed to either one, are they both quite toxic?
The bait would be obviously more toxic because the rodent, and I can't give you the numbers, we can look it up, but the rodent will have metabolized a certain amount of it or whatever,
But still dangerous, though, I mean.
Potentially, I don't know if, I don't have that information. I don't know how many, what the toxicity is of a rat or a mouse that's already consumed the bait that gets consumed. What I've read is that it's cumulative. So, that's why you have issues with wildlife and raptors, is they consume multiple carcasses. And actually that kind of leads to the next couple of slides here. Slides 11 and 12 are talking about the rodenticides that have been found in Vermont wildlife. Fish and Wildlife has a program where they collect, I think it's livers, might be kidneys, I can't remember. But they collect organs from animals that have been trapped for fur and analyze them. And they have analyzed fishers and bobcats. And slide 12 has the numbers there. That's up on this.
No, we don't have it up.
It only shares if you have your computer.
Oh.
We all have it in our tablet.
Yeah. So anyway, and these are results from 2021 and 2022. And they found, it is livers that were tested. And, they found first and second generation materials in the livers. Now, if you talk to the folks from Fish and Wildlife, and you may want to have them come in and testify about this too, because they've got all the data. What they'll say is they can't correlate the presence of those rodenticides with any particular mortality. Okay, these were animals that were trapped, and harvested. The other thing that, we've been talking to, we've been talking to each other about this, and one of the things that they told me is that they haven't analyzed more recent samples. So one of the things that we're going to do, we're going to work with Fish and Wildlife to get more data and develop a set of recommendations on how to minimize exposure to wildlife, because we don't want wildlife to be exposed. I mean, these materials are designed to control rodents. And, there are practices that can be employed to reduce exposure. And that's what we want to do. So we are going to be working with them. Already had preliminary conversations about, setting up a work group to pursue a set of recommendations on how to do it.
We have Nelson.
Yeah, thank you. Two questions. One's a general statement. All Fisher bobcat harvested in the state of Vermont, every carcass is turned in to the Fish and Wildlife so they can analyze it for health and reproduction capabilities and whatnot, and very closely monitored. And I didn't know they were drawn litter again, but
Yeah,
it's a great vehicle working with the trappers to do it.
right.
Secondly, does New Hampshire have the same restrictions? John's neighbors down there right across the brook from him, do they have the same restrictions as Vermont, or are they
I know they follow the same federally.
Yeah.
I don't know if they have any additional. I don't think they do. We had actually, when in 2023, we did a joint rodenticide stewardship training right on the border with New Hampshire. We did it together and got pest control operators in from both states and went over, what the best practices are. The thing about, and, I don't know if we need to follow the rest of this or not, but what we want to do is have people use it properly. I worked in the pest control industry for a while, and it is easy for pest control operators to get lazy and not do the right thing when it comes to rodenticides, because there's a certain amount of labor involved in making sure you do it right. Essentially what you have to do is you have to place the bait stations in the right place. You need to check them regularly. You need to put the bait in. You need to check the bait. You need to remove carcasses. Well, that's a lot of labor. And some pest control operators, not all by any means, there's a lot that do it very well, but it can be, there's a temptation to skip a few steps, put the bait out, not go back and check it, not go back and collect the carcasses, because it's labor intensive, and labor is money. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do in talking to pest management professionals, is make sure that they understand how important it is to manage these products properly to reduce exposure to wildlife. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, especially if we work with Fish and Wildlife, to come up with some good, best management practices to educate people how to use it. We need to educate pest management professionals, and we need to educate the public about how to use these products properly.
Steve, I've actually got the slides up, and the rodenticide and Fisher sampling that was done.
Right.
To be sure I'm interpreting this correctly, that there were no instances, at least of the sample fishes,
Every sample.
where there was no detect. Yeah. And is there any reason to think, so these were harvested, trapped, any reason to think that they are not a representative sample of the population overall?
Not to my knowledge. Again, that's where you need to talk to.
Yeah. Representative Lipsky.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Steve, I was reached out to by a constituent over the weekend.
Mhm.
I know we haven't really taken a lot, we've taken some testimony on this issue. This constituent pointed out to me that relying on bait boxes only by licensed operators may use more toxic second generation anticoagulants. But their concern was that neither of these things have addressed the secondary poison protected bird species, bobcats, foxes, fish or dogs and other animals.
Mhm.
And they allow it, that is because as long as a rodent can exit a poison bait box, it doesn't matter who's setting the box, the poison rodents are eaten by other animals.
Mhm.
So it'd be interesting, then they suggest, short of an outright ban, we might consider the following as compromise. 1.1, require that only boxes with one-way door be used to prevent poison rodents from exiting. 2, limit the number of poison bait boxes that may be used per location as control operator Middlesex. Now, I'm not verifying this, I've just heard this. This is what I was saying. Set out 22 bait boxes around a relatively small storage. And it had some catastrophic impact on the fox family, or restrict how long the poison may be left out. Right now, some pest control operators leave poison out year round. So those were concerns, and I just like to hear your recommendation or thoughts on those concerns.
Well, that's exactly what we're talking about, coming up with better practices. If there are practices, I mean, leaving bait out, having too many bait boxes, leaving it out too long, those are not good practices and they will result in high exposure. So what we have to do, we have to control rodents, okay? I mean, the economic and health consequences of not controlling rodent populations can be severe. Food processing facilities, food warehouses, restaurants have to maintain a high level of rodent control, or they're out of business, basically.
Very fair.
Yeah, lots of places. So anyway, the point is we have to figure out a way to adequately control rodent populations and minimize exposure to wildlife. So there's a couple of things there. One is that, the knowledge and the techniques for controlling rodent populations have to be, communicated, and people have to be educated about them. It's too easy, like I said before, some pest control operators get lazy or they have an economic reason for doing it. They don't do all the steps they need to do to control rodent population. They just put the bait boxes out and put bait in it. And that's not controlling rodent population. That is, in my opinion, that's not the way to control rodent populations, and will result in higher exposure to wildlife if you follow those practices. There are other practices. Okay, there are lots of things you need to do. When I was in the pest control industry, I went around. One of my jobs was to do quality control on rodent control programs for high-end pharmaceutical and food processing facilities. And if you're doing it right, you have to use multiple techniques to identify where the population is, what the population consists of, what's the best technique for controlling them. You don't just put out bait boxes and go home. So there's a lot of work that can be done there. The bill that I saw anyway, where you just prohibit the use of those products, isn't the right way to go either, because then you're taking tools out of the toolbox that we need to control rodents. So you need to find a balance. You need to properly use the material. You need to develop the practices that work for Vermont. And you need to minimize exposure to wildlife, but you also need to control the rodents. I mean, we have the composting requirements in the state. Compost is unlimited food supply for rodents. You have to do something or you're going to have serious problem. So that's what we need to do. And then the one other thing about, exposure to wildlife. So EPA, and this is in the slides, and I can get you the report if you'd like it. EPA just finalized what they call their biological evaluation of rodenticides under the Endangered Species Act. So they're looking specifically at the impacts of the 11 different products we've got on endangered species. And their conclusion, after doing all their evaluation, which they published in November of 24, and this is in the slide there, that the rodenticides, if they're used properly, will have no effect on 88% of the listed endangered species, which include birds and everything else. So it's all about how you use the product and if you do it properly. So, that's the problem. That's what we have to address.
Representative Bergen.
The pests are primarily rats and mice, but are there other types of creatures that these products are used for?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Voles, gophers, things like that.
Yes.
Again,
Squirrels, chipmunks.
yeah, I'm not that familiar with that angle of it. And that can all be addressed in practices, in developing the recommended practices that work.
Representative Boston.
Yeah, so you said 88%, I think, of endangered species aren't impacted by this. What about something like a domestic cat that's an indoor-outdoor cat, and they are repeatedly eating mice outside in their yard?
Again, I don't know what the accumulative effect of that would be.
I mean, it sounds like 12% of endangered species are harmed by it. So I'm just wondering like how they came up with that figure, like.
Well, what they were doing is they're looking at the use of the product and would it affect EPA's, duty under the law would determine if they register these products, they'd have an effect on the endangered species. And when they did the analysis,
Yeah.
They had no, and I didn't finish the whole thing. I mean, they had no effect and they had least likely effect. I think they only had a likely to affect like 1% of the. And then what you have to do is you come up with ways to minimize that. And so they have a series of measures that they're going to implement to minimize the effects on those species. Things like the traps that you're talking about, the one-way traps would have to be required in some areas and things like a carcass removal in some areas, things like that. So the point is there are things you can do. Now, when it comes to a domestic cat eating a fair number of rodents that have been exposed to rodenticide, then you have to look at the situation. So why do you have so many rodents to begin with? What can you be doing differently to control those rodents? And, you have to look at the whole situation. Again, I don't think the appropriate, or I don't think it's a good idea to just say you can't use the products. Okay, because that takes away your ability to control the populations. There may be some situations where you don't want to use them, or we restrict them, but I don't know what those are yet, and that's what we have to go through the process of developing them.
Or what if it was only able to be used by certified people? I mean, I think that's partly what the bill intends, is that not that some things are completely gone, but a much narrower scope of usage than we currently have.
Well, that may be the solution. I don't know if that's the solution at this point, because if you restrict the use of all the materials to only certified people, then there'll be people who can't afford the services of the certified applicators, and then what are they going to do? The thing about rodents is, there are multiple ways to control them. Trapping, exclusion, but to really control a rodent population, you need to use as many different approaches as you can. And, like just putting bait boxes out and putting bait in and forgetting about them is not the way to control rodents either. It takes effort, and knowledge of what's going on. So that's what, we'd like to do. We've already taken some steps. We've begun the education campaign for consumers. We've done training with the pest management professionals. We need to do more of that. We need to work with Fish and Wildlife to come up with some, better recommendations on how to minimize exposure to wildlife. And that may include, recommendations for homeowners, how to keep their cats from, being exposed. But again, just prohibiting their use, I don't think is the way to go. We have to come up with a better way to do it.
The very limited language that's in the bill that was introduced that prohibits their use, but also mentions except when there's no alternative. And
Right, but who decides that, you know?
well, I guess we would have to decide that if we were to, actually
Right.
do something with the bill, but it seems to have been written with the thought that simply banning them, outright, might not be,
Mhm.
might not work.
In our continuing ed this year for my license, they went over a big section on rodenticides, which was never part of my original license.
Mhm.
So they are making the effort and the outreach and probably will continue more and more. On the farm, rats are an issue. Sometimes we use these methods, sometimes we use others. My wife being a veterinarian, she has zero fear of anticoagulants, zero. She said, I can fix that. The what that is not restricted is bromomethylene, and those keep her up at night. So just,
Because there's no, as Steve was saying before, there's no antidote if a pet,
No.
Is that second generation? What is that?
First, that's a non-anticoagulant.
it's a
One of the
non,
three that's,
it's a non-anticoagulant, and
and again, the way EPA was trying to deal with that is require them all to be in,
bait station,
Bait station.
yeah.
yeah.
And one of his inspectors did go around this winter, because I got a phone call from one of our farm and garden stores saying, she came and took my rat poison. I said, well, what's going on? Well, Bob, you can sell it to licensed people. You need to renew your license so you can sell it to licensed people. But I don't want to do that. No. It's one or the other, Bob. If we have rules.
Representative O'Brien.
Steve, you talked about sort of best management practices if you use these sort of family of pesticides.
Mhm.
Does the agency have any advice sort of in the IPM, integrated pest?
Oh, yeah, well, that's part of it. That's,
Of
Yeah.
maybe try alternatives first, like you're
Right.
saying, right? Try traps or shooting them or cats or containment, that sort of thing.
right.
And then, second generation go to these things, if you can't control it then, just because is there any weighting of
Well, so.
strategies here?
Yeah, and there's nothing formally that we publish, but I mean, we always recommend integrated pest management. The first thing you do with rodent is sanitation, and exclusion if possible. Some of the structures in Vermont are almost impossible to get exclusion, but so you sanitation, restricting availability of water is a big one, and that's not always possible either. So then you go to, trapping. If in a well-designed rodent control program for a large facility, you monitor. You do all the things you need to do to eliminate water and food, but then you monitor to see if you have a population and what the population is. And then based on the monitoring, then you apply the bait. So in a large facility, some of these facilities are, acres in size and would require hundreds of bait stations. You don't put bait in every station. It's just a waste of time and money, and it's unnecessary exposure. So you monitor it. And if you find one part of the facility where you're starting to get some activity, then you put the bait there and then you monitor it. But it's monitoring and understanding what the population's doing and doing what you have to do.
We use, even all the healthy, so-called healthy alternatives, as far as, predators eating.
Mhm.
This was, what's the baking soda with, there's a mix.
I'm not familiar with
something where they essentially explode, and we used it on rats last year, and it worked really well.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Third generation.
Yeah.
you didn't use that on seagulls.
I'll look it up, yeah. It is essentially like a pancake.
Before we let Steve go, any other questions or anything else you wanted to say? There is a nice slideshow on the page that Steve was talking about, and we can all take a look at that. Was there anything you didn't get to?
I think I covered it all. Again, we want these products to be available to use, but they need to be used properly. And that's education and training.
All right, good. Well, thank you for coming over. We may, if as we dig into this topic, if there's interest, if there continues to be interest in the committee in doing something legislatively, and it sounds like you're already committed to working with Fish and Wildlife.
Yes, sir.
But we may ask you back.
Anytime.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Want to meet Richard's wife? Yeah.
I told her and she's like. But we met the state director of the Vermont Veterinary Medical Association. I'm sure they're.
Stay on.
definitely good there.
Before I think we're going to take a short break before we move into our next segment. Before we do that, does anybody have anything you wanted to
Could we,
add? Reflections on what we just heard?
could we have Fish and Wildlife come in? I'd like to know more about their study and what they found in their surveys.
Yeah, I think we should definitely do that. And Sidonia, if you would make a note to that, when we're putting together next week's agenda, we will spend some more time on this. And I know we've had a number of people who've reached out. I have, and maybe others haven't, but reached out expressing an opinion on this bill. And I don't know whether any of them want to testify, but we can probably find some other folks too.
Dave, what does the bill say about the non-anticoagulant generation?
When? Let's see. Bill would restrict use of any other legal rodenticides, including bromethalin, near wildlife refuges.
Oh, okay.
So do we have, sorry. Yeah. Do we have other people scheduled to come in to talk about why this might be a good idea?
Not yet, so that's what we'll, I think, be looking at for next week.
What seemed like something that was very simple is not so simple at all.
Well, yeah, I think that the point about needing to control the rodent population, we want to understand better what the implications of not controlling the rodent. I mean, we can all sort of imagine why we would want to control the population, but in restaurants and food stores, on farms, what does that actually entail? And are there other approaches that could, lots of questions.
Yeah, I have some questions. I'm sorry it's gone, but what is a 10-acre facilities referring to? Would that be a food processing?
You would imagine, warehouse, maybe.
Craft,
What?
like Kraft or Ben and Jerry's. I know it's 10 acres. Our farm is fairly sprawling, Chad.
Oh, I guess probably.
And if you go around from the bunker silos and all the way down across the yards and down the other 5-6 acres.
Not so much in Vermont, but in
Yeah.
other states, there are massive structures.
So, and my other question, because I'm unfamiliar with these big boxes, are there ones where a rodent can go in and walk out, or are there one-way egg, no exit boxes that,
So traps essentially, yeah.
I guess, or bait boxes, but once you get in, you can't
Yeah.
exit.
To check in, but
Yeah, Hotel California,
Well,
Anyway, those are,
yeah.
there are more.
And we hold all those questions, remember them, write them down, because by the time we get our next witnesses in, it may be a few days, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's take a little break, and to our witnesses, Vern, I see you, and there may be others waiting in the Zoom room. Thank you for your patience and please bear with us. We're going to just take a short break. Then we'll get back into F60.